Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Share my screen. Okay, so the topic of our time together is soft skills within software development, or soft skills for software engineers. So that's going to be what we're talking about. This is not a conversation that is going to discuss different programming languages or how to learn to code. Soft skills would be the other things, right? The things that are very important to get a job and that employers are looking for beyond just whether or not you can do the work. So we are going to, the way I want to think about soft skills is kind of like a Tootsie Roll Pop, right? Or a piece of candy that has a hard outside shell with a soft inside. Candy is, in order to get to the soft part, you have to get through kind of this outside layer. And it doesn't matter how good of a programmer you might be, if you struggle to represent your skills or have a lot of these soft skills, then it's going to be hard for employers to really understand some of the best parts of who you are and the value you bring to their team because of these relational or conversational barriers. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about is those soft skills so that you have a better chance of standing out to employers and really representing yourself well so that you get the chance to showcase your technical ability. But many people think in the process of looking for a job and interviewing and ultimately doing well has all to do with technical ability, but there's so much more. So I want to talk about that today. When I think about soft skills, we're going to talk about transference. So what are the things that you're learning or you may have learned in other areas of life that contribute to technology, right? You may feel like you have not been from the tech industry, or you don't have a computer science degree. That's kind of the gold standard in the States, is a computer science degree. But there's a lot of skills that you do have that still transfer into a tech-focused workplace. And so we're going to talk about those. The next is the importance of communication. Right? Communication is so much more than just the words that are coming out of our mouths, but it's the way in which we talk and the consistency with which we communicate with others. That's very, very important. So we're going to spend some time talking about that. And then there's time management. In the workplace, how you manage your time has a very big impact on how well you're able to work and how well you're able to work with others. And then finally, professionalism. And what does it look like to show up as a professional in this day and age? Right? When I was growing up, I remember my parents, they would put on their uniform, or my dad was the teacher, and so he would wear a very nice outfit. And that was him being an adult and going to work. Well, today in technology, being a professional looks a little bit different than that, but there's still a level of accepted professionalism that's important to remember. We're going to talk about that. My hope is that you're going to find something, not everything useful, but something here that can be useful and then applied to your journey on your path to getting a career. I also want to call attention to the fact that there may be some context differences. So most of my professional experience has been working in the United States. However, in reviewing a lot of the material I'll cover, I still think a lot of it transfers. I think this could transfer in your own context, and especially if you are working with or hope to work with people from the United States, I think it can also transfer as well. So we're going to go ahead and dive in here. And then again, if you have questions, please write them out, and then we can do a question and answer time at the end. Or you can also, if you have access to the computer, you can type in your questions into the chat, and I'll periodically take a look at that to make sure I'm answering some questions along the way. As we dive in, I want you to remember something. The goal is not to get it perfect. Perfection is not the goal. The goal is to do it well. So the way I would say that is excellence, not perfection. If you wait until it's perfect, or you feel like you have it all figured out, you'll never get started. So much of figuring it out requires you to get moving and to start something. So it can be very intimidating or require a lot of courage to dive in. But I think that's an important part of learning and growing, is just getting started. So find something that could work for you. This is kind of a programming joke, so it may not fully make sense at this point. But a lot of your life skills and experiences help and like contribute to your professional journey in ways that you might not realize. There's a joke in technology that 1 + 1 = 2 or 11. And if you're adding strings in programming, then adding two strings together just combines them rather than truly adding them together. So a 1 and a 1 is 2, or it's an 11. And I think a lot of our skills and experience in our lives work the same way. You have done things in the past that might not be tech related, but can still be valuable in the tech industry. So this is me. When I was in college, I was actually an education major, so I went to school to learn how to teach. But to pay my way through school, I worked at a company called Medieval Times. And this is like a dinner theater. So we dress up like people from the 1100s, and we speak in crazy accents and have capes and swords and ride horses. And it was fun. There are skills that I learned here that have added or made it easier over the course of my career, and I've been able to apply them in different contexts. So I do not ride a horse today. However, the presentation skills that I used back then, or I learned back then, I've been able to apply to a different context, right? So that's an example of that transference. Next thing to consider is communication. One of my favorite mentors once shared with me that expectation minus communication is where we get frustration from. So in life, the times that we get really frustrated, maybe it's with a friend, maybe it's with a boss, maybe it's with a loved one or a child. We get frustrated because we have certain expectations that either weren't communicated or they have expectations that they did not communicate. And then those expectations start to clash, right? So if we want something or we expect something and we don't communicate it well, then that's where people get frustrated. And so as you think about your ideal working conditions, or what you hope to earn, or how happy you are with the type of work you're doing, just thinking it isn't really enough to make sure that communication is happening very thoughtfully. We want to not only evaluate and figure out what our expectations are, but find ways that we can communicate that with other people. And there's a joke in the tech industry that people who write software, programmers, tend to be a little bit more introverted. They are kind of more quiet, soft-spoken. And it's even more important to figure out ways to speak up and to advocate for yourself and your needs and your expectations. I think in my culture, white men don't have a hard time doing this. We're taught as young boys that, yeah, that's totally fine. You just say what you think. And we're given a lot of latitude culturally to just say what's on our mind, right? The social cost of doing that is very low. In other cultures, that's much harder, right? For different genders or people working cross-culturally, to feel like they have space to advocate for themselves. So one of the benefits of transitioning into tech that I've noticed, especially if you're working in the States, is getting comfortable, sharing and communicating more about what you want. And culturally within the States, that's much more of a thing that's expected and encouraged from employers, because otherwise, if they don't know, then they can't do anything to help. And so communicating those expectations is very big and can be difficult if you're coming from a culture or a context where that's not usually what's accepted. The best example that I have from my own experience is actually the house that I grew up in. It was a very loving home and my parents cared a lot, but we didn't really talk about our feelings, right? And what that meant was that there were times where frustrations would really start to bubble up simply because we weren't talking about what was actually happening. And that's something where more and more professional environments in tech are creating space to have more of those real connections. And it takes some practice, I will admit. So here are some points around communication to think about for yourself and then get better at actually having these conversations with others, is figure out how you define success. So when you think of success, is that money? Is that free time? Is that benefits? Is that flexibility, right? Maybe you like waking up later in the day, and that's really important to you to keep doing that. Okay, well, that could be very different for other people who love waking up early and would rather, do all of their work at the beginning of the day. So figuring out for you what success means is important, because that, could change the type of job that you apply to. Next is what is the job to be done? So what are you trying to accomplish here? This could be as you are interviewing, right? What are you trying to solve for? But in the problems that you're trying to solve within tech, so maybe it's a programming challenge or something of that nature, not just thinking, what was I asked to do, but what are they actually trying to accomplish in doing this? So figuring out the job to be done, and then which tools can improve communication, right? What are ways that we can make communication better? I know I do quite a bit of work in Latin America, and WhatsApp is the gold standard when it comes to communication. Well, in the States, we use tools like Slack, which are like chat tools. And cross-culturally then, we have a clash because most Latin Americans want to use WhatsApp. The gringos, as I like to call them, want to use Slack. And so we need to reconcile these two different tools to make sure that we're having consistent communication in one place. Now let's talk about time management. I also love that people are jumping in. Hello, welcome. Thank you for choosing to turn on your camera. That's great. I love seeing smiling faces. So let's talk about time management. This adage I've always found very helpful. Show me how you spend your time and I can tell you what's most important to you, right? The way that we spend our time is a great representation of what really matters to us. And I know a lot of times we may say that something is very important, but if we aren't spending time or prioritizing that thing, then the message it can send to others, especially in the workplace, is that it doesn't really matter. And so as you start to think about time management, here are a couple of questions that you could ask. One is, how do I work best? What is the best work environment for me? I know personally, I like to have a clean desk and I like to sit in a chair that kind of keeps my feet on the floor. You can't tell here, but I'm not a very tall person. And so there are chairs that I sit in where my feet kind of dangle. It's very distracting for me. I tend to fidget in that situation. And so I work best at a chair where my feet are firmly on the floor. That's one small detail that I noticed helps me focus. The next is spending time thinking about what of your work environment is working well for you. Some of you may like to show up early, have all of your learning environment set up so that you can hear the instructor and capture as much information as possible. Well, if that's working for you, then keep doing it. That's great. But the kind of flip side of that is figure out what's not working for you. Maybe in the course of your schedule, you might need to wake up earlier so that you can arrive at class and start to learn. Or I've met some people who don't take notes. One thing that you'll notice, you can't really see now, but as you're asking questions over the course of this presentation, I'm jotting down notes. So taking notes works really well for me and it helps me remember things. And then as you ask questions, I can check in and make sure I've answered the right question. So taking notes is a very helpful habit that works really well for people. And then there are other people who can be very forgetful, so they don't remember what they're supposed to do, and they don't take notes. And so I would say not taking notes, if you're forgetting things, probably isn't working for you, and maybe you should consider a change. But these are all things that ultimately help you manage your time better. Something else that I like to do is put everything that I have to do on a calendar. So I have a calendar today, and it had an hour block set aside for this presentation. And then I left a little bit of time on the front and the back to make sure that I showed up on time, or that if this goes a little bit long, that I can be fully present here. Putting that on a calendar is a time management technique that can be really powerful and helps people do a better job, both in the learning, which is very much the season that you're in, and also as you transition into work. Working across time zones, digital calendars help out a lot because it allows us both parties involved to see the time represented in our own time zone. And that's very huge. So if you're planning on doing work in the States, it's even more powerful to put it in a digital calendar because those calendars account for those time differences. And next is professionalism. The expression that I would use here is that tenacity trumps talent. So tenacity is this go-getter, hardworking attitude. Usually people who are willing to work hard, put in the work, and persevere tend to do better than those who just show up very talented. And a real world example that I have here is actually from running. So I've been a runner for most of my life. And there are people when I was much younger who were just naturally better at running. Maybe they were taller, they had longer legs, they were just faster than me. But over the years of me showing up, putting in the work, training differently, I was able to run faster than the people who were just talented. Now, I think it's great when you can combine the two, right? If you're talented and work really hard, I think that's the best combo. But if I had to pick between starting out very talented or being willing to put in the work over time, putting in the work, showing up and being consistent has had a bigger impact in my life than just being talented. I've joked with many of my friends that I'm actually not very talented. I just don't go home. I stay later than everybody else, right? And eventually that starts to really add up. And so as you may be entering into the workplace or struggling just to learn to code and develop these skills, it can be very discouraging at first if you feel like you're not getting it. But over time, your knowledge will start to compound, your effort and your willingness to put in the work and focus on doing these things does start to turn around over time. It just may not feel like it at first. And let's talk about some professionalism examples. So you've heard me mention a lot about focus. All of the examples that I have here actually come from reference checks that we do for potential candidates. So over the years, I've hired a lot of software engineers, designers, project managers, people within tech. And for all of them, I get references. So I look for people, past employers or people in their community who can vouch for this person's talent and abilities. And what I hear back usually in a reference check has very little to do with how good of a programmer they are. Because at a certain point, you're going to be good enough to get the job done. But when asking, what makes this person really stand out, these are some of the patterns and trends that I've heard from those references, right? People advocating on behalf of others. Focus really stands out. People who are really good at avoiding distraction and staying on the project at hand. That helps you learn better. And also when you're doing work, it helps you get the work done at a higher quality or faster. The next is planning and thoughtfulness. People who spend time and energy actually mapping out what they want to learn, how they want to grow, what they're struggling with, what they hope to improve on. Being very planful makes it easier for others to collaborate with you, and also for you to get a clear sense of where you're headed. And then also it gives you something to look back on, a map, so to speak, of where you've been, so that at times when you get really discouraged, you can see, oh, I have been making progress, right? A week ago, a month ago, a year ago, here's where I was. And today I'm here. So planning is a big part of that. Item number 3 in professionalism is being responsive. So making sure that if somebody's sending you a message or an email, that you're responding. You don't always have to have the answer. I had a friend who just today messaged me and said, hey, what are we having for lunch? Very simple example. And I didn't know. I hadn't thought about it yet. It's better for me to respond and say, I'm not sure, than wait until I actually do know, because perhaps I wait until I only know 10 minutes before lunch arrives. Well, now it's kind of too late. And so I could give them that answer once I know what it is, but it isn't very helpful to them. And so there's a difference between having the answer that somebody asks for and being responsive and just responding to them and letting them know what's going on inside of your head. Some of this comes back to communication. We have an instinct, at least I do, when somebody asks me a question, that I want to wait to respond until I know the answer. But just letting them know, I need to think about this, I'm doing more research, I'll get back to you at this time and date, is very helpful to maintain a good working relationship. Okay, item number 4 in professionalism is follow through. Doing what you say you're going to do. If you commit to do something, and follow through says, I actually do it. And this is really important because in the professional world, there's a lot of talk and people commit to do things or they say they will, and then they never actually show up and do it. Well, an easy way to stand out is when you say you're going to do something, actually do it. One simple suggestion I have here is the more I've tried to focus on doing what I say I'm going to do, I wind up committing to fewer things. So I stop using words as consistently. I stop saying, oh, I'd love to do that. I'll do that. I actually say that less because I'm holding myself accountable that if I say I'll do it, I have to do it. So I want to have fewer of those commitments to make sure that I actually do a higher percentage of the things I commit to. Next is follow-up. In our interview process with both the companies I've started and the company I'm at today, if we don't get a follow-up from a candidate, meaning we had an interview and then they sent us an email afterward, we do not proceed in the interview process with that candidate. So we disqualify candidates simply because they don't follow up. And part of the reason is because things that are important or that matter to us, we should keep trying to push them forward. And a job is a very important thing that typically pays for all of somebody's lifestyle, right? Usually people have one job and it covers where they live, what they eat, activities they participate in. And so jobs are very important. And if something that important you won't follow up on, then how will you behave in other things in life or in your job that aren't as important? So follow-up is really, really valuable in our work and in the interview process. So when you're talking to somebody or you have a conversation, making sure to follow up. Gratitude is a very simple way to follow up, and just saying thank you. Thank you for spending time talking with us. That's a really great way, a great practice to participate in follow-up, but it helps people stand out in the workplace because so few people do it consistently. But it is something in the interview that we will disqualify people and not proceed forward if we don't get that follow-up. The last one is reflection. Life is moving very fast. We are all very busy. And so it's hard to take time and look back and think about, what about this week was exciting? What about this week was discouraging? What did I learn this week? What did I struggle with this week? So you could do it daily, weekly, monthly, but taking time to reflect and figure out what of the way life is, am I comfortable with? And what of the way life is, do I want to change tomorrow or for the future? Reflection is the beginning of that. And I think it's a very important part of being a good professional. Now, I have covered a lot of information. I'm also not sure how great your internet connection is. So if you are able to hear exactly what we've covered or I've articulated, but I hope you found something. And I want to remind you that the goal here is excellence, not perfection, right? You don't have to do all of this today, but find something. What is one thing that you heard that you could try? And that's very important to getting better and pursuing excellence. Two very important things that aren't necessarily obvious, but whether you're trying to get a job or you are trying to make an impression in the workplace is, or you're trying to stand out in the workplace. First thing is to make an impression. Find a way that is uniquely you to stand out from people around you. The next is to be memorable. At the very beginning, I showed a picture of me on a horse wearing a cape with very long flowing hair. That helped me tell a story, but it's also memorable because as you see it, it's kind of funny and it's very outside of what you were probably expecting. And then it helps build a connection, which makes people memorable. And so finding for yourself, what is something about you that makes you memorable? You'll notice from my example, riding the horse, that there's nothing about that that's technology, but it doesn't matter. Being memorable doesn't have to be, I write the best software, I design the best apps. There are ways of standing out and being memorable. And I have kind of my last two things that I've noticed from my career have had the biggest impact over time. The first is to be consistent, showing up consistently, putting in the work. Very early on when I was learning how to write software, my goal was to spend time every day doing it. And that every day started to compound over time. And so the more time we can get uninterrupted or without stopping, then we can start to see our just momentum continue. And last is be bold. So bold to me is a word that means courageous. It means brave. And so much of what you're doing here, right? You have joined this program. You are in a class. You've taken action toward doing something different in your life. That takes courage to do that. And many people think, well, now it's done. I did the courageous thing and now I can just get the job. Well, fortunately for you, that is the first, hopefully, of many courageous steps that you take in your career. And I would encourage you to keep looking for ways that you can take risks and be bold, even when you get a job, because that helps people stand out. Stretching outside of your comfort zone is a way that we would often talk about that in the States, right? We have people who are very comfortable, but those who tend to be the most successful or get the job they want or make the money they want are people who are looking for ways to step outside of their comfort. And you've taken that step being a part of a program like this, and I would encourage you to find ways to continue it moving forward. If you found this helpful, anything I shared, or you're like, wow, this guy talks really fast, I didn't pick up on his little Americanisms, I need a little bit more time to digest this information. We've actually written a book on the topic. It's called Code School, and I have a free copy available for everyone here. So I'll be passing some information along so that you can get your free copy of Code School book. But I have that. It's no charge. I took all of my understanding over years in technology. I worked with somebody who actually built curriculum for code schools and has seen hundreds of people take the same journey that you're on. And we wrote a book together that covers everything from making the most of a code school experience to getting a job to standing out and to building a lasting career. So that is in Code School book. And I would be very excited to give you access to that free copy. And because you showed up today, that free copy is yours. So I'm going to pause now and give us some time for you to ask questions. Again, if you have your own computer and you are logged in, feel free to drop those in chat. But thank you so much for spending your time with me, and I hope this was helpful. Feel free also to unmute if you're in the room, and I can cover some of those questions as well.
Okay, we have a question, please.
Yes.
So I would love to know the challenges you faced when you started.
Yeah. So when I started, there weren't as many resources. So when I was coding something and I didn't know what to do, there were fewer places that I could turn. And so one of the things that I had to figure out very early, and I think would still benefit you, and Trex, you might want to pause or mute your audio on your computer. I think it's echoing in the room. Thank you. One of the things that I would do is I tried to get better at looking up things online. So using resources like Google, Stack Overflow, and finding different ways that when I hit a challenge, which we all will, and it's very frustrating at first, but when I hit something I don't know, figuring out better ways to look up that information. I think it was some famous inventor said that wisdom is not knowing everything, but it's knowing where to find it, where to find that information. And so that's something that was a challenge at first, that over time I tried to figure out how do I get better at finding answers to my problems.
Thank you.
Excellent. Any other questions?
How do we handle self-doubts? Like sometimes I do things that I don't get there. I feel really bad. And I have to go home and just sit on it and read and read. And I come back and sometimes I'm just scared. I feel, what if I don't get it? So how do I handle myself in my head?
And I had a little trouble hearing what I thought I heard you say, and maybe you could give me like a thumbs up if that was accurate, is how do I handle myself, or like in my head, I get very discouraged and feel like I need to, maybe you're lacking confidence, or get discouraged as you're hitting struggles. And how do you handle that feeling of discouragement? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. One thing I found helpful is to remember that everybody struggles. Nobody has ever done this. Nobody's ever done what you're trying to do, and it not had problems or challenges or setbacks. Other people have had the exact same struggle that you have had, and it's worked out okay. So that's the first part, is you're not alone in doing this. The second thing is remembering that the goal is not to have all the right answers. I remember when I was in grade school, we were given tests, and the teacher would use a red pen and they would cross through what I got wrong. And then at the top, they would write my score out of 100. And what those tests did was they start to teach you, I think incorrectly, but they teach you that there is some perfect answer, and whatever you did is either perfect or it's not perfect. And that's not usually how creating software, writing technology works. There's a lot of different ways to get at the answer. And so part of the learning process, which is hard, but I think can be valuable, is we do have to have some standard, but usually when you're trying to solve a programming problem, a lot of innovation or creative ways of solving problems come about because there's a lot of different ways you can get to the answer. If you said, how many ways can you add numbers together and come up with the number 2? There's not a lot of ways to do that. But if you think, how many different numbers can you add together to come up with the number 100? There's a lot of numbers you can add up, and there's a lot of different ways of getting at the same final answer. And so I think technology is a lot like that. So as you start to get discouraged or lack confidence, remember that, okay, well, maybe there's a different way of looking at this problem that is actually more in line with something that you could do or that aligns with your strengths. And then in the end, so my third and final point on this would be remembering or having hope that it's something worth pursuing. One thing that I've found being married and having children is that it's very hard. Most days, it's very hard. If I based my desire to be married and have kids on most days, I probably wouldn't do it because it's hard. But I believe that the long-term benefit is worth it. I have hope that what I'm trying to figure out and how I'm trying to make it work is ultimately going to be worth it. And if you think that that is true, that putting in this time and putting in this energy, if there's hope of it being better than whatever you have today, then I think that's worth reflecting on and remembering as you get discouraged. Maybe the moment is very hard and there's nothing you can do to make it easier. Okay, but if you have hope that what you're trying to learn and figure out provides something better, then I think that can also help keep us motivated when times get hard.
Okay, I have a question.
Yes.
How do I improve my programming skill when I'm having issues with logic? Like presently, I'm having issues with logic. How can I improve myself? How can I improve my logic?
So one thing that I found helpful is seeing what other people do, right? So an expression that my teacher would use in school was dress for the job you want, not the job you have. And a big part of that is, if you desire to learn something that you are currently struggling with, then ask yourself, who are other people who don't struggle with this? And what would they do, right? And the great thing about technology and the internet is you can often access different pockets of information or experts in certain areas. And so if I wanted to learn more about improving my skills in logic, as you're referring to it, okay, well, who are people who do that well? Who are people or companies, or what are technologies that seem to have that problem that I want figured out? And how can I go learn about them, right? Whether it's blog posts, it's books, seeing what other successful people do who have figured out what you're trying to figure out can be very helpful. And they may not always tell you the answer, right? They may not say, well, here's how I did it. But emulating some of their behavior can be very helpful. Here's an example that I have. Again, I'll bring up running because that's something that I've always really enjoyed. Fast runners move their legs quickly. It's called leg turnover, right? If you move your legs quickly, you will naturally run faster. Okay, so that is a behavior that fast people do, that even if you're not very fast, you could get faster by just doing what they do, which is move your legs a little bit quicker. And I think if you have, whether it's logic, maybe algorithms is a word that kind of is very intimidating for people, look for or try to find resources from people who do that well. And then maybe you could talk to them or, read content that they've produced. So rather than just being, kind of struggling or being discouraged because you lack something, go find somebody who emulates that very well and see what you could learn from them. In a class of this size, I would guess that there's somebody a little bit further ahead than you are in that area. And so if you, if you want to improve with logic, then who is somebody in the class who you think does a good job of that? And what I would usually do is I would go up to them and say, hey, I think you're very good at this thing. Do you mind showing me your process for how you think through problems? And I think that's one really great way to learn. You don't always have to learn from the absolute best, right? You could learn from somebody who's just a little bit further ahead than you are.
Thank you.
Let's do we have one more question? It looks like we may have one in chat here, so let me read through this. So if you are in the group, please think about your last question. If you're in the chat, I see this one here. As a young developer, how can you find your way out to being an outstanding in your field and career? Okay, so if you're a young developer, how can you find your way to becoming outstanding or excellent? I'm hoping I'm understanding that correctly. A big thing is experience, trying things. So much of getting good just means putting in the effort and trying. One way that I did that very early on is I would look at a piece of technology like Twitter, which is a pretty popular social media app. And I would try and say, okay, could I rebuild that technology? Could I build it on my own, right? I don't need somebody to pay me. I just want to spend time seeing if I could recreate that. And so early on, maybe it's just copying what you're seeing other people doing. That's very common. In school, if I were to copy somebody's homework, we call that plagiarizing, and that's bad. But in technology, copying what a really good piece of technology has done is a great way to learn. And over time, once you can accumulate a lot of experience and then you've applied that knowledge over and over again, is really how you get to a spot where you can be truly outstanding. And a big part of it is because when you learn something, apply that knowledge, you can actually gather feedback, or something happens as a result that you can learn from. And so it's the learning that comes from our action that helps us get better over time. There's another question here in the chat. So buying you some time if you're sitting in the room, just thinking for your last question. In the chat, it says, looking back to how you started, what can you say were your daily best practices that really helped you grow? I have one that a lot of people don't like. It's getting up early. I would get up early, hours before work. So I started getting up at 6 a.m. And then I started getting up once I realized how helpful it was, I started getting up at 5 a.m. today. And part of this is because I also have children that need help, but I get up at 4 a.m. and I spend hours every day working on projects that I get to pick. And over time, that helped me start to get better jobs and new opportunities by waking up early and putting in the work. If I had to pick one daily practice, it was that. But maybe mornings aren't for you. Just spending time writing code or practicing your skills every day would be the second. So the first is just creating large chunks of time that I can control and spend time working on. And the second is actually working on improving my skills, stretching my knowledge. And then the last one is reading and listening. So I listen to podcasts, audiobooks. I consume a lot of content from really smart people. And that helps me understand how really smart people think. And so I don't think I'm a very smart person, but I spent enough time hearing how smart people think that you start to think that way too. And that's very helpful. We have a question here that says, how do I'm having issues remembering a previous language once I am learning a new one. How do I manage that? First, I would say it's very natural. You learn something and then you start to learn a new language and then you start to get them jarbled. That's very natural. Building more things in those different languages just helps. So over time, the more you do it, the better. I would also encourage you not to learn 5, 6, 7 languages before really mastering 1 or 2, right? So as you're advancing, and some of this I realize could be a part of your curriculum, and that's okay. But really try to dive a little bit deeper into one language before moving on to the next. And if you're in class and that's not how the class works, then I would think of it like drinking from a fire hose. So you're going to have a lot of information coming at you, and you're not going to remember it all. But over time, the most important stuff, you will start to remember it. And so a lot of this is just like being comfortable while you're uncomfortable, so that you can stay at it long enough that these things start to work themselves out over time. We have a question here. How do you think I can improve on my study period? Because I find it hard to practice for long times, and you really want to. The first is sleep. Are you getting enough sleep at nighttime? Right? And are you going to bed early enough? Are you waking up early enough? Making sure that your body is well rested is a big part of helping our minds focus. The others, you'll probably have to play with this for yourself. In the mornings, I usually, I don't eat a lot when I first get up, because I find that when I eat, I get sluggish. And so if I want to really like focus and spend time having a long practice period, then that happens better before meals, not after, because I like to take naps after I eat. And so if you're struggling to spend more time practicing longer, figure out what works for you. Maybe you think, no, I could never study without eating something. Then do that for sure. Other people, you may notice that, hey, my mind responds very differently to food. There's a question here about how do we choose a career that's a best fit? So how would I address finding a career that's a good fit? I only know one way of doing that, which is trying things. How did you find out what foods you like best? You tried stuff. And so I think in much the same way, finding a career that's the best fit for you will probably require sampling a lot of what's out there. And some people don't like that because of how long it can take to get a job. But the only way I ever found something I liked was to try a few things that I didn't really like very much. And that applies to our careers as well. I'm going to answer the last question here and then open it up to anybody else who's in the room, which I think some of you are actually also, still in the room. I would like to know how long it takes to be very good at understanding and implementing my coding skills. I'm a beginner and I feel like 3 months isn't enough for me. You're right. 3 months probably isn't enough to have it all figured out. I've been doing this for 10 years and I'm still learning. But I would ask yourself, am I getting better? Right? And so the goal is not to understand everything, but to be consistently getting better. And I think there are certain things that you can get good at in 2 months, in 3 months. HTML and CSS are 2 things that I think people could spend a little bit more time practicing, because to get really good at HTML isn't actually that hard, or it doesn't take that much time. It can be challenging, but to go from I understand it to wow, I'm really good is actually not that much more time. Whereas if you're looking at a lot of like frameworks and libraries and big programming languages, then it can take years or decades to get really good at some of those. But things like HTML and CSS are very good because the underlying concepts are pretty simple. And if you can just try a lot of different ways of doing them, that can be valuable. And the good thing is most of the web has HTML and CSS. So you can make websites for family, for friends, for yourself, if all you know is HTML and CSS. And today, I can build an entire website in a few days because I've taken the time, very little time, to get good at HTML and CSS. And so if you said, Morgan, what are 1 or 2 things that I could get really good at very quickly? HTML and CSS. Once you start to layer in JavaScript, backend frameworks, databases, that makes it way more complicated, but you can build an entire website with just HTML and CSS. There are also a lot of great libraries that make it even easier for HTML and CSS to look really pretty. So I think that can be very powerful. And then do we have another question from somebody in the room who is not on a computer? No? Okay, everyone. Well, I have a recording of this presentation. So if you struggled to hear, oh, yes.
Yes. Because, yes.
I was not able to hear.
How do I know if I'm good enough to start applying for job?
You don't. You're just going to have to try. It's scary. It's very, your heart's probably beating really fast because it's scary. You won't know. There are some employers who want very, very skilled people. And there are other employers who need people who aren't as skilled. And so until you try to apply to jobs, you're just not going to know. Sorry, it's very hard. And it's something that when I said be bold or have courage, that's why, is because until you put yourself out there and try to do it, you're just not going to know. And so that's that's for many of you, that may be the hardest thing, is to realize that no matter how hard you work or how much you practice or how good you are compared to your peers, you're just not going to know what kind of opportunities are out there until you start to apply to them and put yourself and go for it. So the good news is there's a lot of opportunity out there. And if somebody tells you no, that's okay. Keep trying. The beautiful part about a job is you only need one. And so 100 people could tell you no, and that you don't have the skills they need, but you only need one of them to say yes. And so it will require some courage. You're not going to know before you do it. You just got to try. And so that's probably not what you wanted to hear. There is no test that tells you if you're ready. You just need to go for it. And I will say, we have hired people, and I've tried things on the job that I did not know how to do, and I had to figure it out. And that's very normal. So thank you all so much for spending time with me. I do have a recording. And so if your internet connection wasn't great and you want to hear this again, maybe slow down the speed so I'm not talking as quickly, or just capture more of what I was saying, then I'll send that recording along. Also, a reminder, you get a free copy of Code School book, and I can work with your instructor to make sure that we get that copy to you. But thank you so much. I believe your time is your most valuable resource. So thank you for spending it with me. Farewell.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that.